Okay. Hopefully you can all see this. I'd like to, oops, okay, there we go. I would like just to have this as a part of our opening. It's an invitation to you to have a notebook on hand and to be doing some reflecting and thinking. And as you do that, we are going to start with introductions. Oh, I'm realizing I can't, oh well, I don't think I can, oh, okay, that's okay. So I'm just going to pause and let you look at that before I barrel ahead with introductions. Okay. We could put this in the chat as well if we need to. And thank you to Dale M. Kushner for offering this as a part of today. All right. Okay. All right, so next I would like to introduce the panel. I come to this work, my name is Catherine Stevens, and I come to this work with a background in education. I volunteer with Art Lit Lab in Madison with the Literary Arts Program. I am a musician. I am a community arts advocate in Madison, and I teach piano to young people in Madison. The panel, we have Charles Kushner, Madison poet, novelist, essayist, blogger. Dale is the author of The Conditions of Love, a lovely novel about a young girl who loses her parents and how she finds her way in the world. Dale is the founder of The Writer's Place, which at one time was on State Street in Madison. Dale also publishes essays and stories about transcendence on Psychology Today. She is finishing her second novel, you'll be excited to hear, The Lie of Forgetting. Also, her forthcoming collection of poems is called M, inspired by the figure of Mary Magdalene and other stories of desire and loss. We're going to share with you some web links so that you can find more of Dale's work as a part of the event. Next on the panel, Charles Payne. So happy that Charles is part of our group today. Charles is a spoken word artist and poet. He came to Madison from Lansing, Michigan. He is a teacher. And Charles, I think I first met you at Art Lit Lab. And congratulations for your recent award for your poems, Dead End and Dinner with a Pig. And this is a local Madison award and featured on the Art Lit Lab Review online magazine. And today we also have Wilder Deitz. Wilder grew up in Madison, Wisconsin. He is a jazz musician, a composer, a band member, a teacher, and Wilder works with the East High School Black Music Ensemble. He has just recently opened the Wilder Deitz School of Creative Music. So Wilder, thank you very much. Thank you to all of you who are part of this. Thank you to Rita Mae Reese for your help with pulling this together. And thank you to all of you who are here. All right, so Rita Mae, thank you for your help with watching the time. What we're going to do next is move on to opening remarks and discussion. Panelists, if you would like, are invited to share some remarks about your own experience of reconnecting to art during the past year and all of what we're going through. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to who would like to go first, Dale or Charles? And Wilder, you can be part of this. I know you said you may not need as much time as the other two at this point in the agenda. So, Dale, would you like to go first? And be sure to unmute yourself, right?
Got it. Okay. So I have to note that I think Wilder donated some of his minutes to me, and I thought, oh yeah, the musician and the spoken word artist are in performance, and the writer here has a lot of paper to get through. So if you'll bear with me, I'm going to take about 10 minutes of your time. Because I have so much to say about our subject today. And maybe it's good I'm going first because I think everybody's going to want to jump off on some of the things I'm saying. First of all, welcome and thank you all for coming. It's a beautiful sunny day here in Madison. And I appreciate anybody who's willing to be 2 hours on Zoom when we have sun in Madison. So that is very cool. I'd like to thank Rita Mae and Catherine for inviting me to be on this panel, and also just to have people consider donations to the fabulous Arts and Lit Laboratory, because you guys do fantastic community work. So let me just put in a plug right off the bat. So when I was trying to think about how to title what I'm going to talk about, and by the way, my first writing cue is, if you're having trouble figuring out what you're organizing your thoughts, one way to help yourself is to think about titles. Titles are really helpful in helping you pull together what you're thinking about. So that's my first little cue. So I was thinking about what to call this course or talk, and I came up with, what are we talking about when we're talking about art? What are we talking about when we're talking about art? Which is actually a play on a really famous Raymond Carver story, which is, what are we talking about when we're talking about love? Some of you may know that. It's a really well-known anthologized story. And the truth of it is, art and love have an awful lot to do together. And I hope to just talk about that for a minute. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to read my bullet points because time is limited. And I'll try to give you, I've been thinking to myself, what can I offer you today, you artists, you creative people, from being a lifelong laborer in the field of art? What could I possibly give you? And so these are my bullet points, and they're just jumping off places. Bullet point one resource we always have with us is our creativity. And here's what I mean. So one of the most famous definitions of art that has always stayed with me comes from the great Russian writer Leo Tolstoy, which is, art is the passing of feeling. Art is the passing of feeling from one human heart to another. He says, he wrote an essay about this, what is art? It is upon this capacity of man to receive another man's expression of feeling and experiencing those feelings inside himself or herself. That is the activity on which art is based. So here's my personal experience with this. After witnessing on TV George Floyd's murder, I felt speechless. I felt mute, and I felt compelled to say something. But what could I, a white woman, far removed from Mr. Floyd's world, contribute? I did not want to appropriate a story that was not mine. And yet, and maybe many of you can relate to this, I was deeply unsettled and I needed to find my words. The result of this inner conflict really surprised me. I don't just write for Psychology Today. I write fiction, and as Catherine said, I'm deep at work on my second novel. but my original training, my MFA, is as a poet. When George Floyd was murdered, I hadn't been writing poetry for quite a while. And yet something in me rose up, and the tension I felt in needing to speak about violence, oppression, and privilege, and about victims and perpetrators sprung forth in what became a series of 15 new poems. I hadn't written a poem in about 4 years. These are now part of a section of my new coming collection. The poems are in the voices of women who have suffered violence, mothers who have lost children to war or disaster, women in exile, girls kidnapped by rebel forces. I felt I could get inside their skins because I know about loss too. Perhaps not as dramatic a loss as in these other cases, but I know that I carry in my own DNA the grief of my ancestors and a lineage of persecution and diaspora. My novel in progress, The Lie of Forgetting, delves into this intergenerational trauma. Bullet point 2, empathy enabled me to write my poems. And here's a really important message I think speaks to our topic. Difficult times invite us to cultivate our inherent capacity for empathy by exposing us to suffering and to feel into the pain with our entire being, and to understand when we give these feelings form, as we do when we make art, they are redeemed from darkness. We take what's inside ourselves and objectify it so that we can walk around it, study it, so that we can represent our private reality outside ourselves and offer it to the culture. And the great thing is, we don't have to learn empathy as much as allow ourselves to feel it. This gets back to Tolstoy's definition of art from the 19th century, the passing of feeling from one human heart to another. Feelings connect us with what is most vital and powerful within us. It's one of the ways we know we're alive, and it's a barometer of what matters to us. So again, in this time when some of us are struggling to find how to re-enter or connect with our creativity, we just have to have the courage to be vulnerable to our own truths and realities. Point 3, but to make art, we first have to believe that making it matters. And I think this is another hurdle many of us have to jump. It's a profound and serious question in a world filled with very real, very concrete struggles. Why create art, but why even go there if we think it doesn't matter? But our desire, my answer is it matters enormously. For many of us, we might think art is superfluous. It's an indulgence of a privilege in certain classes and populations. And we probably ask ourselves, as we should, how can my poem or my painting or my song, in the grand scheme of things, matter? And why should I spend time and energy on it? And I want to say it matters. Point 4, our desire to create springs from the depth of our souls. It's an urge that's hardwired in our chemistry. And one piece of evidence from this is that art has been with humankind since humans have walked the earth. If you think about the cave paintings and before that, even more primitive art, we have always created art. It is a gesture linked to our need to document our lives, to bear witnesses, and to create a sacred space for ceremonies in which we connect with the divine. Bullet point number 5. Art creates new forms and new visions that help us survive. Okay, this couldn't be more important, I feel, at this time in our culture, when all the myths and all the grand delusional dreams, like the American dream, and all the institutions that have failed us, we are replete of new visions, a new mythology, how to step forward. I think this is the role for artists. So let me repeat this. Art creates new forms and new visions that help us survive. Gospel, hymns, blues, jazz were born out of trials and tribulations of a people. In the death camps, in internment camps, in enforced reservations, in Latin America, the families of the disappeared, all these people created art to bear witness and to survive their terrors. So we need to bear witness. We need to find our voice. We need to have the courage to face our own realities. Point 6, the personal is always political. Those of you who've been around as long as I have will remember this from the feminist movement in the 70s. The personal is political. Think of the outpouring of poems that happened after 9/11. They were posted on fire stations. They were posted in laundromat windows. People spontaneously made art to deal with their grief. This is true time and time again. Think of the murals that have come about after innocent murders in this country. People want to express themselves, and you're part of that collective. So the brilliant, your voice is important. Okay. You say, what does this have to do with me? Maybe it feels like you are in exile and you spend every day trying to survive in a system founded on oppression and colonization. Or maybe you say to yourself, I'm not in a death camp and I'm not in exile, and my issues are minor compared to these. But in both cases, the question remains, why are my work and my voice important? And believe me, they are. And here's number 7. Each of us lives a life that contains these things. And so each one of us has a unique perspective and an individual way that we view the world. Our individual perspective is what makes the whole and the collective. And each of us participates as an actor and a witness in creating a society. So the individual makes the collective, and the collective is what we're talking about here. Bullet point 8. We already have the raw material we need to create. New research suggests creativity is an instinct and that we're hardwired for it. This means that in some ways we're already prepared and we already have the raw material. We come to being a creative person with a personal temperament, with specific social circumstances, with specific historical circumstances, with our ancestral influences, with our inclinations, and with a great deal that we don't really know about ourselves. And that is with a great deal of mystery. And I think mystery is very much part of the creative process. It's part of what spurs us on. And I believe that when we go into the darker places, including places like depression, anxiety, the despair some of us are feeling, I believe that when we go inside that with an open heart and with curiosity, that these darker elements are transformed and that there's a gift in there. And I think this is the deep secret of art. It is life restoring. It is life enhancing. And that is both for the creator and his or her world. So lastly, I want to say that experience, that's our material, the good, the bad, the ugly. And you might ask yourself, if you're looking for a prompt, which I have many, what is it that you will most remember about this time of the pandemic on planet Earth? What is it? What is pressing inside of you to get out? And I'll end with a brief poem by the German playwright and poet Bernard Brecht, which is called Motto, which I think is fantastic and so apropos. In the dark times, will there be singing? Yes, there will be singing about the dark times. Thank you.
All right. Dale, thank you so much. In the interest of time, I think I will need to hand it off to Charles. But please remember, we have time for discussion today and time to hear from all of you. I mean, how does that sound? Charles, I want to be sure to give you the time that you would like.
That sounds great. And I won't be too long.
Okay.
Dale did a really incredible job
Yeah.
giving context of why this is important.
Yes, thank you.
What I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to give you guys just a real life experience, which was mine, about why this is important. But before I get started, one thing that I really want to do is I want to activate the chat and ask, how many people in the Zoom room right now have attended a arts and literature lab event, class, or concert? And in the chat, just write Y or N, yes for Y, N for no. In the chat, could you write that down for me if you attended one of these different events? Okay, so we have a few yeses, a few nos, a concerts. Yes, yes. Great. Well, the reason why I want to ask that question is because Arts and Literature Lab gave me the opportunity to talk across difference. I was new to Madison. I didn't know anyone. And I immediately was hit with the Madison flood and lost everything that I've owned. And I was looking for some joy and I went to a concert. And it was the first time, no one asked me at work. No one asked me out in public. It was the first time someone asked me how I was doing. And it really made me feel like I was a part of something. And I was a part of a community that made me want to seek more. So I'm grateful to have the opportunity to speak to you guys today about my experience at all. And I understand that before I was invited to this panel, like so much has changed in the world and it's a very different place. And that the global pandemic, just like Dale has said, has been an accelerant to a global awakening of injustice, people becoming anti-racist, confronting implicit bias, and acknowledging privileges, that have directly impacted the direction of my art as I attempt to explore the paradigms of sharing my own personal story with the community of Madison. A little bit about me is I was born into a working poor family. I had to work multiple odd jobs in order to supplement my parents' income. And in college, you couldn't tell me anything. I wanted to be a writer like Mitch Albom. But like most, working poor Black boys from Michigan, our parents really only wanted us to work in the GM factories. My life was pretty much put out for me like the Diego mural in the Detroit Institute of the Arts. I was supposed to be in uniform and working an assembly line. But luckily enough for me, I found teachers that believed in me, that pushed me to get my education. And I was able to get a degree in education and become a teacher, which my parents thought, oh, that would be a good job. It has good benefits. You'll have stable employment. But it wasn't until I moved to Madison until I was offered the opportunity to take adult literacy classes that helped me get past the obstacles that stood in my way when it came to creating art. While growing up in the Midwest, I noticed that art education opportunities in my schools were very anti-Black. Unfortunately, institutions know how to attack Black people and they do it well. And I was often told that spoken word artists like myself were not writers, that were just loud, exciting, and full of energy, which suggested the poets that I found successful weren't doing real writing because they were not skillful, calm white males, which is a drastic departure from the slam poetry I was introduced to. And I was saddened because these constant refrains came up over and over again about slam poetry as I spent my time in education. Sadly, creative writing is a tool that most people use to balance stress and relief, but it's rooted in anti-Blackness, intentional, unintentional, or otherwise. And sadly comes at the backs of people saying, don't be loud like them always being Black, them always of color, them always hysterical. And it infuriated me until I became an adult and was given a different context. I learned in all that poetry predates the printed text. So slam poetry is actually getting us all back to writing. I was able to attend write-up groups and talk to people about form. I was able to learn about poets that I'd never learned about in school. And I was given a space to actually work on my writing. And it was the first time I was given the confidence to actually submit something for someone to judge. And like Dale said, art is really important because community is important. I don't want to think about where I would be if I didn't have the Arts Literature Lab community, because I'd have been working in isolation and struggling like a lot of people in Madison right now. So think of it as this. These skills that you're learning and that you're practicing and that you're sharing with others are giving you an opportunity to talk across difference. That's all I have to say, Catherine. Thank you.
Bravo. Thank you, Charles. Thank you, Dale. We have, checking our time, of just a few minutes left in this first part. Would anyone like to respond or add anything or share a question, comment? We have about 2 minutes. And if you do, please remember to unmute yourself.
Can we, is Wilder going to respond? We're going to hear from Wilder before the break.
I'm happy to, if you'd like.
Yes, sure.
Happy to see a little bit of my time, but
Yeah, thank you, Wilder.
happy to speak to you all as well. As Catherine said, I grew up in the east side of Madison, Wisconsin. I also grew up in at the Union of Florence, Ellesmere, and Erlanger, Northern Kentucky, in Louisville, Western Kentucky, and in Henderson, Western Kentucky, in Baraboo, Wisconsin. And these are all the places that I was raised around people taking care of me. These are the places whose stories I carry around with me. And since becoming a grown person, I've traveled not much, but enough to have appreciated the chance that this pandemic has brought to stay in one place and be forced to be still and to acknowledge and enjoy the magnificent little adventures that are around me all the time, that are around all of us living in a place, in a community together. And so even I was reflecting on this as I was walking to the Wilder Deitz School today, which is where I'm speaking to you from. It's a nice half-hour walk through the neighborhood of Darbo-Worthington, over East Washington Avenue, through the Eakin Park neighborhood, across the street over to Oscar Mayer, and then down the road to the school. And this is a walk that I make just about every day, and it has become my replacement for the more far-ranging adventures we're used to with the privileges of not living in a pandemic and having access to gasoline and air travel and all these things. And so I've really appreciated the chance that this pandemic has given me to be a little more still and to be a little bit more introspective and to have time for practice, the practice of the craft that will prepare me to respond with art when the world starts moving a little bit more rambunctiously again. And I think just briefly before the time I'm allotted, I'd like to just play a little melody for you all just to dedicate the time.
So nice. Thank you. Thank you, Wilder. Perhaps in the chat you could let us know what that was that you played. Was that one of your own pieces?
Here, I'll just answer verbally since it'll be a little quicker.
Okay.
Yeah, that was a prelude and fugue that I wrote. Speaking of the advantages of the unexpected blessings of the pandemic, I was due to marry my fiance this past year. We postponed, giving me, we'll say, a new opportunity, a silver lining to write some music for the service. That was the prelude and fugue to open the service for our forthcoming wedding.
My goodness. Excellent. Thank you. It was just lovely. So thank you, panelists. As we were putting this event together, oftentimes we thought about James Baldwin as an artist and someone who had to work through some of his own dark periods. And I'm going to share a brief quote, and then we're going to move on to about 10 minutes, hopefully 10 minutes of questions for the panelists, and then open it up and have the audience pose your own questions. So the James Baldwin quote that I would like to share is this: "The precise role of the artist then is to illuminate that darkness, blaze roads through that vast forest, so that we will not, in all of our doing, lose sight of its purpose, which is, after all, to make the world a more human dwelling place." James Baldwin. If any of you would like to be reminded about the life of James Baldwin, we're going to include a resource about his life and his work in the document that's coming up soon. So, very good. All right, so let's turn to some questions, and I will invite the panelists to, I guess, decide if you'd like to address this, and as much as we can, keep it a discussion. The first idea that we're going to open with is, what is it that allows you to make art, and how do you get to it in a world and with a mind filled with obstacles? So that's the first idea, and I have a few follow-up prompts if needed. And I will ask, who would like to take that one first? Just maybe raise your hand, or anybody feel prepared to talk to that? Dale? Okay. All right. Dale, be sure to unmute yourself.
Can you repeat the question, Catherine?
I'd be happy to, sure. Okay, oops, hang on. What is it that allows you to make art, and how do you get to it in a world and with a mind filled with obstacles?
Mm-hmm. You know, this is partially what I was hoping to address in what I said. I think so many of us, especially if we haven't, quote, produced something, think that our art or our inclination towards art doesn't matter. But we still feel this inclination to speak. And so I think one of the first challenges for many people, and even for seasoned writers, I mean, I started my second novel a number of years ago, and I'm still working on it. It takes a long time, and it's not, art isn't for the faint of heart necessarily, but you have to believe it matters. And I think this is a very important thing for all of us to consider, to find inside ourselves, why does it matter? I think Charles and Wilder spoke very eloquently about why how their art came about, and why it matters. This is our tribe. We artists, we're a tribe. Being an artist is not about producing a product. And I think, unfortunately, in this, capitalistic system, we're always thinking about product. To me, art is a way of being in the world. It's a way of perceiving the world. It's a way of being open to the world. It's a way of being open to your own realities. It's a way of being open to your own truths. So the journey, I think, and it's a hard journey. It's actually, I think, a hero or a heroine's journey. The journey is going inward in order to go outward, to go inward for your truth in order to go outward. And the world needs us to do that. We need to look at our shadows. We need to look at our dark sides. We need to understand that. And hopefully beautiful art can come from that. So that's my first pass on that.
Yeah, thank you. As I thought about this question, the other ideas that were coming up for me were, for example, how can creative work and learning something new help us through dark times? And if I can add one more thing, and I'm going to hand it back, but so did you find yourself unable to write or create during the past year? And if yes, can you describe, or could you share some practices around self-care that you could recommend to begin again and to grow and to restart? I'm hoping that it's all part of this topic. So who would like to take that?
Seems like Charles has got a hand up.
Good.
Yeah, I don't know if you can see my hand up. It must
I know
be.
I can't, but that's okay.
It's okay. Yeah, I would love to take that one. And I think I really struggled because when you're a spoken word artist, you depend on your audience to be able to give you a reaction. And before I knew it, the moth was no longer meeting in person. And for me, art is something that's very communal. So I need to find community in what I'm doing. So for me, what helped me first was I needed to take care of my needs, make sure that all my personal needs were being met. So I made sure I met with my mental health care team to make sure that I let them know what was going on, because what I used as a coping mechanism has been taken from me. So I made sure that my needs were met. And then I started looking for opportunities online in community. And I found a monthly poetry group, which got me writing poetry in community and talking with people. And the great thing about going to an event is you might talk to someone there who also writes, who you can continue that conversation with. You can explore your own thoughts. And I think getting the opportunity to do that and take some online classes has really got me back into the mode, because I needed some accountability, because I didn't realize that being isolated was making me depressed to the point where I wasn't making any effort.
Yeah, so true, Charles. Thank you so much. Should we open it to the audience now? Would the audience like to contribute something or pose a question about what we've shared so far?
If before we do that, I could
Oh,
say
Wilder,
something.
of course. Sorry. Yes.
I'm
Sorry.
wrestling with a borrowed computer here and a funky charger, and so sorry for disappearing there for a second.
Oh, okay.
Listening to what Charles was saying and
Good.
also what Dale was saying, and I want to comment on. There's a lot that both of these fine people are saying that I would love to respond to. Obviously, there's not time to have a
No, please.
full, wide-ranging discussion. But Dale, you had just said something about the artist's journey inwards, and that reminded me of something that I was thinking about, how the different ways in which I think we misconstrue or misconceive of art in the society. And one of those ways that we misconstrue art is that we think of art as this homogenous thing, this talent that either people have or they don't, and that the people who have it are all of a kind, and the people who don't are the hoi polloi. Whereas art is actually this, everyone here knows art is this multifaceted expression of life that comes across differently from every person. And to me, at least, the way art manifests in my life is less what do I have to say that the world needs to hear, and more me trying to formulate what it is I think the world is trying to tell me. And so when I produce art, it's almost as if I'm looking to the universe and saying, is that right? Have I got this right? Is that what you're trying to tell me? And I love the word essay, which is a form of writing, but in French, it means to try. And I think of all art as an essay. It's an attempt to express what it is, at least for me, that the world is impressing upon me, and using art to teach myself those lessons.
Yeah, I really appreciate all of what you're sharing, and the idea that we have to look inward. If you're a musician, the audience is not really, a live audience is not there right now. But Dale, were you going to add something?
I love what you just said, Wilder. And, you know, I think one thing I was so taken when you were talking about your walks, your travels. And I imagine you maybe, I don't know, you can tell us or not if you hear music, or I imagine a musician would hear like music and the leaves falling or whatever you do. That it's true that in an interconnected universe, that's why all of our voices are a medley, are a collection, as are the voices of the leaves and the wind and everything. It's all interconnected. It's a gigantic web. And I think, you know, artists perhaps, and other people too, you know, I don't mean to, you know, make artists into this sort of very precious thing, but some of us just are more sensitive, open, want to be open to those other voices. So I just had a PS on what you said, Wilder. I really appreciated that. And you can tell me privately if the leaves talk to you, because sometimes they talk. I have a couple of trees that talk.
It's really a time to listen to our environment, isn't it? And listen to the birds and the wind. And we have someone who'd like to pose a question in the audience. Bridget, please, would you like to unmute yourself?
Thank you, Catherine. And this is an observation, and then I think a question to Wilder and to Dale and to Charles. Dale said very emphatically, and then each of you said as well, that art matters. In a funny way, I almost felt you trying to convince yourselves a little bit, but certainly to declare it. But I also want to finish that sentence a little bit, because it hasn't been said out loud, that one of the reasons it matters is because of what that triggers in other people. What your music, what your poetry, what your novels, what your spoken word triggers in other people, the emotion it triggers in other people. And then what that inspires or, you know, horrifies us, whatever reaction it drives us to do. And I know that often I work with writers a long time. I've been in publishing a long time. And I recognize it's not always that often, unless you're generally working one-on-one with an audience, that writers get to hear back, or artists get to hear back the impact they've had on people. So I just want to say for all of us, never to discount the impact you're having. You probably don't know the ripple effects all the time, but I'd love to talk a little bit about, or have you talk about, whether in fact you allow yourselves the luxury of recognizing that beyond what you're getting back, you realize one way or the other, for better or for worse, you're also starting ripple effects that go on in ways you may never know. And have you heard back from people?
Wilder, yes, great.
I may be an unusual person, unusual one to start this response, because as a musician, I am most tied, I think, well, maybe equally so with Charles and his slam poetry, but tied to having an audience, and most of what I do is, you know, requires that counterpart of performer and audience. But this is something that I work with time and time again with my students. The nice thing about having multiple generations of students is that you get a lot of practice in some of the same answers to some of the same questions. And one of those questions that I always get is, why should I give my all, or perform well, or care about gigs or performances where I'm there as background music, where the audience doesn't seem to care about what I'm doing, where people aren't listening intently? I have a little bit of a longer answer to that. We kind of discuss it, and then we have a chance for them to do some of those performances and see for themselves. But the short answer is because in every single audience you ever play for, there's always at least one person listening for dear life, and to whom your message and your music is the most important thing in the room, in the city, in the universe. And without fail, at least in the performances I've given and been to, there's always one person for whom that music really, really matters. And if you can learn to see that person, or at least even imagine that they're there, or empathize with the idea, then that starts to connect you more with the music. And you start to realize why it matters, that even if there were no audience at all, you're tapping into something that really, I guess, matters is it's like saying Black Lives Matter. It's almost like an insufficient word, to express how important this performance, or this idea of creating art, in my case, music, is.
And I wholeheartedly agree. When I was traveling and I was doing, we have the National Poetry Slam, we would always say, you're going to save somebody's life in that audience today. And it was always impressed upon us that the reason why we perform is for the conversations after the show, because we wanted to bridge dialogue across difference. I think that's the one thing I miss about having the opportunity to perform at the Moth, is I would always be the last to leave, and I would allow anyone who had a question to have a conversation to talk with me, because I know by that conversation, I might be the first person of color they've ever spoken to. And I was able to break a wall down. And I try to do that one by one, because that's what was done for me. I just went to a jazz concert for all, and people decided to step up and talk to me and took interest in me, and were able to get me connected and showed me how to become a member, and explained to me how it worked, and took their time and gave me something from their library to read. Just this importance of giving people the skills that they need to dialogue across difference is something that art does extremely well. And that's why it really, really matters. And I think the reason why we're saying that is because art is really underfunded. And as a spoken word artist, I'm not like a paid poet. People expect for me to do these services always for free. They don't see it as labor. They don't see the practice that I'm doing as labor. They see it as something that I have to do for me. So I always have to remind myself, right, that I can't evaluate myself solely based on how the world sees me.
Gail?
So I'll just jump in here. I have no idea how my work will impact people. I just always hope that if I can touch in a truth in myself, that something I put out there will hit someone else. And I think I'm just, reiterating what Wilder and Charles said so beautifully. And then sometimes, I'm not a performer. This is a performance for me. Being on Zoom, you guys there, you're out there on the stage. I'm more like the artist in the garret, just like walking around in her bathrobe. So I'm not a performance person. And so I don't have that instant audience feedback. But I've been lucky enough to receive letters or notes from readers that are very personal and very touching. And I had no idea, because I think what Charles and Wilder are saying too is that we just have no idea what hits people or why. But it is absolutely a way of connecting. And then in terms of this issue about does it matter, I always notice that in countries that are under siege, and we're not quite there yet, but we've almost been, it's actually the artists that are locked up, because the artists are the truth speakers. It's the artists that get sent to the gulag along with the political people, because they are truth speakers for the most part in most cultures. So it can matter dramatically, and it can matter very individually.
My final observation, and I have read Gail's novel, so I can speak to that. And I will certainly get to know your work better, Charles and Wilder, but the reality is that art in general is so important because it's a neutral way for people to communicate. It doesn't generally start with a point of view. And God knows these days we need that kind of platform. But the bottom line is that it's a conversation starter. And Charles made that point, is that in a neutral way, in a friendly territory, you can start conversations you never would have had otherwise. And that happens with Dale's novel. I mean, I've had conversations with my family about intergenerational trauma. I never knew such a thing existed. And it's something that, or resilience, these conversations, it's not the, the plot of the book, but you inspire us to start thinking differently. And that's the impact that you didn't start out to achieve, but those are the ripple effects. So I simply want to celebrate that, acknowledge it, and hope you guys at least recognize on some level all the impact you're having far beyond who's ever in the room hearing your work and actually tells you and reports back to you.
If I may briefly respond to that, I think that's, I want to comment on something that Dale, you had mentioned before, and I'll try not to debate this with you because I think there's a lot of merit in what you said, but rather take an alternative viewpoint to the phrase of the personal being political. And in fact, art is one of these ways that I think what I'm hearing in what Bridget is expressing, that we can start from a place of commonality, of common humanity. I have friends with whose friendships with me are founded in art. And it was only after years of making art together we started to talk about politics and realized that we have, what would seem like tremendously irreparable differences in our politics if we were to start from a place of political difference. But because we started with the commonality of hearing this chord and thinking, nothing more profound than that. That's a pretty chord. That allows us the human connection that then creates the maturity to then talk about the divergences and differences later on.
Oh, thank you so much, everyone, for that. It was really profound and lovely. Thank you, Bridget, for the great question that you shared. If I may, I'm going to just let everyone know about what's sort of coming up next. So a few things are coming up next. I guess we're not quite to the break, but oh, sorry, I'm scanning through my notes. I think what I'm going to do, we pulled together a document about resources, and Wilder, would you like to take another 3 or 4 minutes to play something for us? And during that time, I'm going to put the resources link in the chat, and everyone can at least grab a copy of that and start to browse through that a bit. And then after a few minutes of music, we're going to move to the writing workshop that we have prepared, which is about a 10-minute exercise. Yeah, and we also have a short break coming up as well. So
I'll be happy to play something for you all while you read. This is a selection from a work of mine from this past year called The Border Suite, which I wrote after visiting the Arizona-Sonora border on a human rights tour, visiting with people who had been recently deported, visiting with aspiring asylum seekers, and wrote this work of music in reference to the conversation we were having with Bridget about human commonality and sharing these stories from a place of music. So this is At the Gates of the Embassy from the Border Suite.
Thank you so much, Wilder. Um, I'm going to suggest we take a very short break, maybe 3 minutes, 4 at the most. This gives everyone an opportunity to grab a notebook and some pencils for the writing exercise that's coming up right after the break. How does that sound? We'll take the break now instead of after the workshop. I think that's what we had planned anyway. So
Yeah, so we'll have the workshop and then some more questions from you after the break.
yes, we're not done with the discussion. Thank you, Rita Mae. All right, good. Sound all right with everyone?
So back at 3:12, does that sound good?
Yeah, let's be back at 3:12. All right. So the time is now 3:13. Hopefully everyone is pretty much back. I see Wilder's back. So, that was a lovely piece that you played, Wilder. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. So next up, I'd like to offer a short writing exercise for everyone. And then after that, we're going to have more questions and discussion with the panel. So, all right. I'm going to try to share the screen again. Hopefully. Been having a little trouble getting the right thing on the screen, but let me, okay, one sec, sorry. Here we go. This should do it. Here is the writing prompt. Would you like me to read this for any of you that may have trouble seeing this on the screen? I think maybe that's probably not a bad idea.
Yes.
Okay, very good. So what we're asking you to do in this next 5 or 8 minutes is I will read this, and then we'd like you to do a little bit of thinking, writing about it. And then when we come back, we'll open it up for some discussion from all of you, so that you can share back a little bit about just the experience of doing this next part. Here is your prompt. I saw a mom take her raincoat off and give it to her young daughter when a storm took over the afternoon, wrote poet Ada Limon. And the full text of the poem is posted in that web link. My God, I thought my whole life I've been under my mom's raincoat, thinking it was somehow a marvel that I never got wet. The care others give us is often visible only in retrospect. Imagine perhaps someone making your lunch, cleaning the bathroom of your mess, folding your shirts. Has there been a way in which you've been cared for that you hardly noticed, a metaphorical raincoat that's been held over you? Write for 4 minutes, recreating this act of care as vividly as you can. And how about perhaps after a few minutes of silence, let's keep it a little quiet at first, but then Wilder, maybe you can pick it up in a few minutes with a little bit of quiet music. How does that sound? But I think we should maybe open just with some silence. Okay, great. Thank you very much, Wilder. Great. All right. So I will open this up. Would anyone like to share thoughts about the experience of what we just did? Perhaps what came up, how it came up, were you surprised by any of it? And this is an open invite to everyone. So if you would like to share, perhaps say something maybe in the chat that I'd like to share, or raise your hand if I can see you. Wilder, I think I've told you this in the past. I was born in Kentucky, Berea, Kentucky. So I think we talked about that when you and I met, and so.
Is that right? My cousin who's interning with me this summer here in Madison goes to Berea.
Yeah, lucky. That's really great. Yeah, such a great liberal arts school. Pretty famous. We were only there a year and then we came up to Wisconsin, but I've been back many times. Yeah.
Lovely country.
It sure is.
Lovely country.
Yeah. Yes, it is. Mm-hmm. Let's see. I think what I will also do, I'll put this in the chat because I know that I took it off the screen. There we go.
I can share something, Catherine, if you would like.
Please.
I was very surprised when I read this prompt. I was like, I have nothing to say on this. I can't, which is impossible, right? Like everybody's got a parent or a family member or someone who's cared for them in some way. And I was just very surprised where my memory went, and I guess it went to my mom doing my laundry for me when I was, well, all of my childhood, but especially in high school when the laundry room was in my room, and I would get mad at her for doing laundry while I was trying to sleep or get ready or whatever. And I never really thought about how if she wasn't there doing it, I wouldn't have clean clothes to wear in the morning. And yeah, I was just taken with where this memory took me, and it made me want to call my mom. So.
Katie, thank you so
That's
much.
great, Katie. That's one of the reasons we were thinking about this prompt in particular. I think because during the pandemic, I know I personally haven't felt very cared for. And I think as we reach back and realize how much care has gone into each and every one of us, maybe in distant ways, maybe in closer ways than we realize, I think there's a lot of inspiration I think we can draw from that, and strength and resiliency too. So I'm really glad that worked for you.
Thanks, Rita Mae. I love that idea too. I live by myself now, so I definitely feel not cared for, quote unquote, right now. And this is a good way to remember all the ways that I am, even now, without people being here physically.
All right.
We'll just add that that's in Nicole Brown and Jessica Jacobs' book of 100 poetry prompts. And even if you're not a poet, I think it can provide a lot of inspiration for writing whatever kind of thing that you want to write or whatever kind of art you want to create. And I see Bridget has something to share too.
Oh, good. All right.
Because typical of any kind of prompt, I'm sure that you wrote it and I read it thinking I would respond one way, and then something quite different came out. And in fact, much as Katie said, I instantly thought of my good mother, but then I thought of myself, and then it came out differently. And I wrote about how I've been happily married far too long. That since 1976, I've gotten regularly such uniquely beautiful flowers for every birthday, for every Valentine's Day, and dinners in New York's best restaurants whenever we could afford it, just to save me from having to cook at the end of a long day. And of course, then throwing a blanket over me when I fell asleep on the couch so I wouldn't get cold, and just always asking me how I was and making sure that when work was getting too much, that we did something, no matter how small, to make sure I didn't implode. And I realized that at some point I was not seeing it as much, not recognizing it as much. I stopped seeing. And I would always say thank you. We were always very considerate. He'll be home in a minute, by the way. But the bottom line is that to the prompt, I realized I was the one not recognizing this incredible raincoat that was thrown over me and continues to be thrown over me. And as we know, real love is to see someone. And no matter how much affection you feel, the mortal sin against love is to take for granted. And actually, in the last 8 minutes, you helped me realize you can slide into it so easily and not to. So that's where your prompt led me.
Wow. Yeah. Dale. Bridget, thank you so much for that. Really appreciate it. Dale wants to say a few things. Yes.
I'm gonna unmute. Yes, that was wonderful, Bridget and Katie. This is why I say we're a tribe. It's like I can already, even though this is a Zoom thing, I can already feel the kind of vibes. It's what Charles was talking about when he met his community. And, it doesn't take very much, I think, to allow ourselves to go here. And the here that I mean is, I used the word mystery before. It sort of slipped out at the end of a sentence. But I think producing art or creating art, however we want to define it, is about mystery, just as exactly what Bridget said is you start out in one place and you don't know the hurdles, you don't know the magnificent creatures you're going to see along the way. And you really don't even know the outcome. It's a process, it's the deepest process of discovery. And so again, for all of us, we have this capacity to sort of open ourselves to that process. The process is everything. And it's totally mysterious and sometimes pretty hilarious. And I see Bridget's guy is coming in the back door, so he must have heard you, Bridget. That's all I wanted to say.
And I just want to say, Mindy and I apparently have the same husband, because Rob doesn't drink coffee either, but makes it every morning. So apparently we share a husband.
Are we ready to move to the next thing in the agenda, perhaps? So I'd like to offer the next round of questions. And it starts with this. Okay, here we go. The pandemic has not by any stretch, the pandemic was not by any stretch the only trauma 2020 had in store. In challenging times, how can the arts build resistance, help us re-emerge, and help shape an understanding of the world around us? As an artist or creative person, can you help us understand how this can happen? So that's the next thing that we'd like to try to dive into a little bit. And as you're thinking about that,
Can you repeat the question?
sure, I'd be happy to. The pandemic was not by any stretch the only trauma 2020 had in store. In challenging times, how can the arts help build resistance, help us re-emerge, and help shape an understanding of the world around us? As an artist, can you help us understand how this can happen? I have a few follow-up ideas if they're needed, but I'll pause and see if if any of you want to try to speak to this. I mean, perhaps it could be something having to do with the connection between social action and art, coming out of the events of this past year. Perhaps it could be something around the connection between art and recovery and service. There's a few of the things that I've thought about, but I'll stop there. And if you'd like to speak to this, just let us know or jump in.
Charles, I think you're unmuted.
I'll jump in.
Charles, good.
I apologize. But one thing I think you need to do is you need to consider, like, are you being a gatekeeper, or are you sharing your art with others, and are you helping people get opportunities to be able to share their art, or are you just so worried about your own production? I think the idea of creating a stage that's communal, and examples of that in the city of Madison are on full display. People commissioned artists to do murals where very violent and heinous acts had happened for days on end, right? To beautify the city. People volunteered to help clean up. There were opportunities for youth to do spoken word poetry and get their emotions out rather than, and it was organized in a way that did not turn violent, that never even made the news. So I think the question is, like, if we're going to use art, like, I think the question we always need to ask ourselves is, how are we going to make space for others? And I think, that's one thing, is having art as something that helps heal you, right? And then also, like, moving beyond the status quo once you have an understanding of that. I try to take everything that I have learned in all classes, and I try to share them with everyone that I can meet, so that information is just not siloed in one place.
It's really great, Charles. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Charles. Wilder?
Yes. I was thinking about this on the walk over, the relationship between art and social action or advocacy. And this goes back, I think, to maybe another misconception that society at large may have about art and artistry and artists. I think we're very quick to glorify art that seems to impel action, art that appears revolutionary, art that's dramatic, painted in bold colors, with a clear political bent to it, which is really not my understanding of art. I mean, my understanding of art is that it is less a hammer or a saw or a gun, a tool of that sort of nature to build or destroy or kill or harm, or even heal, as with medicine. It's something more like the warm gust of spring wind air that was hitting me as I was walking down Commercial Avenue. It's more like when someone you care about a lot comes and whispers something to you right in your ear. It's something that has, as anyone I'm sure would agree, those things have tremendous power, such tremendous power, but it's not something that's going to break down a brick wall. It's not something that's going to reroute a river, but it is something that is going to, maybe like that river, reroute things through living the sort of vision of the world peacefully and insistently, time and time again, living that vision for the world that is more positive. And so, Charles, when you're talking about the artistic response to the business on State Street and how we can live this vision, even if we don't have the tools yet, we're not given the tools to fully inhabit this vision every day, all day, we can make a space for that vision to happen gently and insistently. And that to me is like man, it's about as profound as it gets right there.
Sure, Dale, yes, please.
Yeah. And, you know, I think I so appreciate the different point of views and how we're sort of riffing on this because, you know, here's a really old fashioned word to follow what Wilder said, beauty and harmony. And there's also something in us that, you know, there's something in us that protests and wants to speak against violence. There's something in us that also craves it is the transcendent or the divine or the beauty or the harmony of the universe. And that is a part of what art does for us. It brings us in touch with it, whether we're creating it or partaking in it. So these are all parts of the aspects of human nature, and it's not one or the other. And I think, you know, I love this quote by James Baldwin. It was from one of his essays, but I forget which one. People are trapped in history, and history is trapped in people. And I think that part of, you know, our particular historical perspective right now, we are facing a lot of death, violence, and darkness. And it makes sense that some of the art that's coming out addresses that directly. But there's also, you know, as Wilder said, the need for the expansive understanding of art and what it is. So just wanted to bring that up.
Would anyone else like to share? I'm opening it up to the audience on this last question or topic.
Or if you have questions that you would like to ask the panelists.
That's right. That's right. So like, sorry, yes, I apologize. Yeah, what we're going to move to next is about 15 minutes, hopefully, or something like that, of time for all of us to talk about this a bit more, share your own questions, your own resources. We have a lot of time for that. So we welcome your questions and questions for the panelists, for each other.
Share your own struggles, your own successes, tips.
I have a question and an observation that I'm hoping others can relate to. My biggest struggle somehow, even during this pandemic where we're all stuck at home, is finding time to create, because I have a full-time job that's not necessarily the writing I want to be doing. And then I have chores and life, and it's hard for me, especially at the end of a long day, to want to sit down at a computer screen again when that's what I've been doing all day. But once I do it, I'm so happy, but I don't do it enough. Like once I get there, I'm always happy that I did. So I guess if anyone has any tips or thoughts on how to kind of get over that mind game I play with myself, it would be much appreciated.
I just have a quick question before anybody else jumps in. Have you tried writing by hand at all?
I journal. I don't necessarily creative write by hand, although I did for this last exercise we just did. So maybe I should try that more.
Yeah, Linda Berry talks a lot about how the motion of the hand when you're writing unleashes creativity, like it really taps into something. And I get exactly where you're coming from with the screens. I just can't bear to look at it sometimes. So that's my thought, but I'm sure the panelists have some great ideas.
Yeah, and I can share a little bit because I do art part-time. Like I have a full-time job. I tutor. I also do mentoring throughout the city, so I'm super busy. But the one thing I can tell you is it hasn't been just one simple fix for me. It's been multiple different changes. And when people advise you, they'll say, if it's important to you, you'll try different things. So one thing that has worked for me once is I gave myself 10 minutes to write when I woke up every single morning. And I made sure that I did that. But I can't hold myself to that accountability to do that for 5 years. That's not going to work for me. But what really helped me, though, within this community was learning that I don't have to create something profound every time I sit down to write. And it doesn't have to be at a specific time, or I do not have to feel motivated to write. All I have to do is get my pencil to move. So when we did that free write, all I knew was I was going to write till they said stop, and I have what I have. And then I know that I can come back to it and I can make something more of it. And that's what's really worked for me, is allowing myself the space to say, this should be hard. My life isn't writing. My life is working. My life is working with students and it's exhausting. But, you know what I'm saying? Like, maybe I can try this for 10 minutes every day this morning so I get to my tangible goal.
That's awesome, Charles. I mean, the parallel I hear immediately in what you're saying to music is the probably the most disabling part of being in the artistic practice is the fear of not achieving perfection or not finding the right, going down some path that's not going to lead to your masterwork. And I often find that with music, I'll come up with something that I like a little bit too much, and it's a snippet about 5 seconds long, and I'm stuck there for a month because I can't think of the next step. It's like nothing is good enough for my baby. I come up with something that and then where do I go? And I've played that over and over and over and over and over again. And so your idea of putting pencil to paper, proverbially for me, is just fabulous. I mean, Katie, the way you described your struggle with a lack of routine, I mean, you could have substituted in the word exercise for writing, like physical exercise. I think that would perfectly describe my relationship with the physical exercise. Feel great when I do it. I'm so glad that I did. And it doesn't feel bad in the moment, when it's like tough, but you do it because you're going to feel great. The hardest part is just getting your butt in the gym, and making the time for it. And if you make it a second by second decision, like, what do I want to do right now? I've had a long day. I could write, or I could watch Netflix. Netflix is going to win 8 times out of 10, versus just saying, here's what my day looks like from the top of the hill. There's going to be writing at the end of it, and then I relax. And that's something that's really helped for me.
Dale?
Yeah. And one thing I want to say is, don't forget you're incubating. I really like that word. A lot of times, again, this gets back to the idea that we have to produce something. We have to have the poem or have the song or, whatever we think we have to do. But, all during the day, there may be moments when something hits you. And so sometimes I think it's a matter of when you're going through a period where you absolutely can't sit down and make time for it, just know, almost trust that your unconscious mind is working for you. And if you can just, do a doodle or write one line down or note your dreams. I mean, I think dreams are great resources. Not that I've ever particularly taken a dream and made it into a poem or a novel, but your creative mind is working for you. I think it's a matter of sort of being its buddy, being its ally, and saying, I'm with you and I don't have time for you right now, but I'm with you. And so anything you want to give me, I'm here. And you might be surprised that just the smallest little insight will come. And out of that, getting back to Bridget's question, there might be a whole process of discovery that unfolds when you have the time. So I guess the bottom line is, if possible, take the time pressure off yourself right now. Lord knows we've got so much on our plates, and the art will be with you if you'll be with it. So.
And I would add one more thing. I was diagnosed with a learning disability this year, and I gave myself a really hard time for not being organized. And it wasn't until I talked to a professional writer that I learned that there's software that can help you remain organized. So sometimes you just have to ask for that help and that accountability when you're getting in your own way. And I realized I was getting in my own way because I wasn't organizing my thoughts to a place where it was easy for me to get to them. And having the software now that organizes it for me makes it a lot easier for me to complete the stories that I'm doing. So keep that in mind as well, because you might be dealing with adult ADHD and don't even know it, that you're also looking at what does my body need? What does my mind need? What does my mental health need? As well as thinking of how can I be creative?
Thank you for that great question. So is there something else that the audience would like us to speak about? We would love to hear from you if there's more that you'd like us to dive into today in these last about 10 minutes of time. I've really appreciated all of what you have shared. It's been super helpful. Yeah. And on this last topic, I mean, the thing that I think helps me, honestly, is finding space, which sometimes can be so hard to find in our busy lives, and we're distracted and there's so much going on. But somehow carving out some time in your day to find some quiet. Mm-hmm. Get out and take a walk. Bundle up in this cold winter and get outside. And so finding space and quiet, I think, is for me part of it. But what else can we share? What else can we talk about today? This is an open invite. Dale?
You're muted, Dale.
Am I unmute? Okay. So I have something funny to share, because I realized when I was preparing this, I get very intense when I'm talking about art. I can feel the furrows going like this. So I just wanted to talk about humor for a minute. And I composed a list from a wonderful book that was written by Diane Ackerman a number of years ago called A Natural History of the Senses. And she wrote about what some famous writers did to get inspired. And so I copied some of them down, and they're hilarious. And these are the truth. So Dame Edith Sitwell, who is an eccentric early 20th century poet and critic, would lie in an open coffin before writing because she liked the enclosed space. German poet Schiller kept rotten apples under the lid of his desk and inhaled the pungent smell when he needed the right word. Move forward to Yale researchers have now concluded that the smell of spiced apples has an elevating effect on people, which is in fact actually what they spray around in big malls to make you want to buy things. Colette, the writer Colette, began her writing day by first picking fleas from her cat. And you could see where that would be very concentrating. Some writers drank colossal amounts of tea, like 25 cups in one sitting. And many writers wrote in the nude. D.H. Lawrence liked to climb up naked into mulberry trees because apparently he had a fetish with the long limbs and the rough barks, and he liked to do this before he started writing. So if any of these sound like things you might want to do, or you can think of your own, I will not admit to mine. I don't know if the other two on the panel want to admit to theirs, but let's just have a little humor here.
There's a question in the chat, which I think is a great one. Lindsay, thank you for this. I don't know if folks have addressed this, but I have developed a more complicated relationship with my screens, with my phone, with my email, with my Facebook. So I don't think, yeah. If you use the screen to make your creative work, how do you separate that from the other things you use your screen for socializing, for entertainment, for checking on family, that sort of thing? Do you have techniques to share around this? Lindsay, I hope that was okay. I modified your your question just a little bit. It resonated with me. Thank you very much for that one. Are we more connected than ever to our technology through this pandemic?
I have
Wilder?
a response to that.
Thank you.
So
Okay.
I do have to preface this by saying I'm an incredible technophobe. I mean, the fact that I even have a cell phone at all, I mean, mine is from about 2007. I have students who are younger than their phone. And so this is, take it with a grain of salt, because I'm by no means an expert at maneuvering around the new world of technology, whatever. But for me, I just as much as anybody, or perhaps more than anybody, get really wigged out very easily, very stressed out through screens, and even more so than through screens, through digital connection, through internet usage, through feeling like my brain is like worrying in this special way that only happens when I'm accountable to other people in a public space. It's very stressful to have that feeling, sort of not be able to turn that off even in your own home. And so for me, a breakthrough was to recognize, like the way you phrased it in your question, you know, screens, you are using the screens. The screens are just a tool to accomplish the manifold tasks that you're trying to accomplish with them. And I say you generally, this includes myself. Like when I'm transferring some of my compositions to the screen, I try to make myself very aware that I'm not entering a new world or universe. I'm staying grounded in the universe that I inhabit all the time. I'm simply engaging with a tool to try and get a particular job done, and then I get it done as quickly as possible and get the hell out of there, frankly, because it's very stressful to me to spend that time. And I've managed, and I'm very grateful for this, that I have the liberty to manage my use of technological applications to where I'm less tempted by apps or programs that'll tempt me into like screen bloat, like Facebook. I was a Facebook addict. I'm off it now, but I'm someone who likes to think of myself as being able to control myself, but they outfox me. And so I spend more time than I want to. And then I do start to feel like I'm entering another world, one that is a little bit more stressful than the one that I like to inhabit.
My approach is a little bit different. One thing that has helped me is I've wanted to learn how to become better at using my screen. It's not as stressful once you use it in a different way. So when I'm performing, I know that I can make my lighting better. So it feels like it's different. So I change my lighting setup than I would to be different than I do at work. I try to use things like the chat that like get people to talk so I can see how they're connecting. I think it's the small, subtle differences that make the technology a lot easier to use. One thing I've learned now that I've been diagnosed with ADHD is I'm really sensitive to sound. So the last thing you want is your phone vibrating and hearing your phone vibrate when you're trying to concentrate on the task. So I try to just really be connected with my body when I'm moving from different things. And that's been something that's been really helpful for me, because majority of my job is going to be Zoom meetings. Like I can't change that. But what I can do is I can stand up when it's time for me to perform, and I can change my lighting. What I can do is I can cut off my phone while I'm working on the computer, so I'm not multitasking. And I think that's been the thing that's been the best for me, is realizing what work environment is going to make me the most comfortable in an uncomfortable situation.
Great. Thank you, Charles. In our last minute or so, is there anything about this topic of being overly wired that anyone else in the audience would like to comment about? Or I've been cutting way back on coffee. Finally, I figured that out. I'm drinking way too much coffee in the morning. So no more of that. All right. We may be near the end of this afternoon. I just want to say once again, thank you to Charles and Dale and Wilder and Rita Mae. Thank you so very much for being a part of this. And thank you to all of you for being here. Those of you who registered will receive a few things from us, including an evaluation about today's event. Please check out the resources that we've shared. You are encouraged to come back and learn more about Art Lit Lab. Perhaps join as a member if you have not already. And the panelists, would you like to finish up with anything more?
I'm so grateful to be part of this. I want to thank my fellow panelists and again, Catherine and Rita Mae for inviting me. And I needed this. I didn't know how much I needed this. This is connecting with my tribe. And I hope that that vibe went out to all of you and that you felt it too. This is what community is all about, and Charles has been speaking about that. This is important. So I appreciate the opportunity, and it's really been a pleasure. And I hope all your muses hover close and bring you sweet things. That's all.
And I would just say, I hope you come back. A lot of people just come to something once and they say that they're done. But I think the next step is for you to find something else to explore and find another person that you can connect with. And I think if you continue to do that, our community will continue to grow and become better and better.
I'd like to second those thoughts and suggest that maybe if we're done with the spoken portion, perhaps I could play people out.
Thank you all.